News alert, the White House briefing set to start any moment now as a contentious battle heats up between President Trump and Steve Bannon. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. White House lawyers are now taking steps to try and block the publication of that explosive book by Michael Wolff containing highly disparaging comments attributed to Bannon. Kevin Corke is at the White House. What's the White House now saying about the former chief strategist, Kevin?
Well, they're saying a number of things, but I think if I were to use the vernacular of the day, Dana, stay in your lane. That seems to be the message from the president. I mean, clearly they're pushing back. In addition to the flurry of cease and desist letters, it is obvious that the president was none too pleased by what he read and heard about what Steve Bannon is said to have told Michael Wolff. The president, of course, was asked about Mr. Bannon, and he said, look, the forthcoming book is obviously an issue. It's called Fire and Fury for the folks at home that don't know it. Bannon in that book makes a number of assertions, including one that the president once refused to hire someone because he had a mustache. And that the president's daughter, again, this is according to another excerpt in this book, was, quote, dumb as a brick. Bannon did not disavow those comments, but he told a radio audience, Dana, that he still supports the Trump agenda. As for the president, when he was asked if he felt betrayed by Mr. Bannon, the chief said this.
I don't know. He called me a great man last night, so, he obviously changed his tune pretty quick. All right, thank you all very much. Thank you. I don't talk to him. I don't talk to him. That's just a misnomer.
Now, as we've also pointed out, the president's lawyer sent also another cease and desist letter. This one not just for Steve Bannon, but also for the publisher of the book. And this is a very interesting strategy. If you've been following the president's career, you know that this is sort of par for the course, quite frankly. You fire off a letter, you get your lawyers to put one out there, and then you never really actually follow through. Well, this one, though, the president's lawyers sending out that letter saying that it contained, the book that is, contained, quote, libelous allegations. And so we'll keep an eye on that and see if, by chance, they follow through. Dana?
All right, thanks so much. We have a lawyer coming up that will tell us more about that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Kevin. For more on all this, let's bring in Fox News contributors Guy Benson, who is political editor at townhall.com, and Leslie Marshall, host of the syndicated Leslie Marshall Show. Let me play for you, Guy, and have you react. The soundbite that President Trump was referring to when he said that last night, after a flurry of news all day long about the book, Steve Bannon said this about the president.
The President of the United States is a great man. I support him day in and day out, whether going through the country, giving the Trump miracle speech or on the show or on the website. So I don't think you have to worry about that. But I appreciate the kind words.
Guy, from what I've read, I mean, Steve Bannon actually doesn't say anything disparaging about President Trump himself. It was other people within the White House he took issue with, including the family. Your thoughts?
Well, if you want to really infuriate Donald Trump, there's a pretty good way to do it. That's to call his daughter Ivanka dumb as a brick. It's to call his son Don Jr. unpatriotic and treasonous. And it's to suggest, based on evidence that may be forthcoming, we have no idea, that the infamous Trump Tower meeting, the potential or attempted collusion with the Russians, involved the president himself. That's a trifecta of bad on the part of Steve Bannon, and that's why I think we saw the volcanic response from the president yesterday in that really blistering statement. And so, look, I think Bannon, in that little comment he made on the radio, maybe he's just trying to lie low at this point, recognizing that he's already said far too much to a reporter whom he granted massive access to the Trump White House, resulting in what is clearly a giant distraction and really an embarrassment for the administration.
Yeah, Leslie, I was saying that when it comes to book PR, if it's negative towards your principal, there's really no way around it. You just have to plow through it, and you either try to suppress it or to counter it. What do you think about the White House's moves to try to distance themselves from Bannon at this point?
Well, I think it's laughable. I mean, quite frankly, it's almost like, pretty soon if Ivanka says something negative, the president will say, Ivanka, never met her, don't know her. I mean, the American public is smarter than this. And quite frankly, I think the president should rise above this, regardless of somebody's political leanings, left or right. We've seen scathing books written about presidents, first ladies, their children. And I think this is, unfortunately, even Mitt Romney has said par for the course when you're in public office. It's sad, but I think he should, quite frankly, frankly, ignore it. My father-in-law once said, "You're an elephant, and those who make such remarks are little dogs nipping at your ankles." And I honestly think the president should look at these remarks as such. He is giving more attention to the book and to the comments within, and to Bannon's comments by addressing it and by tweeting about it and commenting about it.
Yeah, I don't know. Either way you slice it, you just have to know that no matter what it is, if it's a book that's good for you or a book that's negative for you, it will end at some point. But they're just going to have to get through this week. In the meantime, Guy, let me ask you about this. The Daily Beast is reporting that the Justice Department is apparently considering looking into, again, Hillary Clinton's emails. It's certainly one of the most scrutinized email services of all time, as one of her staffers has said. But what do you think about this?
Well, I have a mixed mind on this. I think that the die was cast really in July of 2016 when James Comey decided wrongly, in my view, not to file charges against Mrs. Clinton for her gross negligence. And I don't really know if they're going to be able to go back and dredge up new charges. I think there will be concerns, especially among Democrats, that this is a president demanding things of the Justice Department for a political prosecution. I think we're going to hear a lot about that from the left. There are, however, I will say, a few questions that I think remain unanswered that are serious about how that investigation played out. In particular, some of the decisions that were made by those investigators to grant immunity to some of Clinton's aides. The way that we've seen the Russia investigation go against President Trump, Mueller's going after low-level people for lying to the FBI and other such infractions and apparently trying to build a case up from there. In the Clinton case, the opposite happened. There was lying to the FBI by, I think, at least 3 now senior Clinton aides, none of whom were charged. In fact, they were given immunity for reasons that remain unclear. So there are parts of that that I think we need answers to. Why did Comey draft the memo exonerating Clinton before the interviews were over? But I don't know if it looks great for the president to beat the desk, pound the desk every day saying, we need to prosecute crooked Hillary, and then the DOJ, which is supposed to be independent, hops to it and salutes.
That's one of the things, Leslie, I was going to ask you about, because in that same article, there's a quote from a Republican-leaning person who says, well, it's about time that you had an investigation that was into Hillary Clinton's emails that had no fear or favor, just like figuring out what actually went wrong. And then there's somebody else who says this is clearly the White House having an impact on the Justice Department, finally trying to calm the president down and saying, OK, fine, we'll look into it. What do you think about it?
I think that's exactly what it is, Dana. I think the president has just been going on and can't, move beyond lock her up. I think a lot of people on the right just want to lock one of the Clintons up, even if they have no reason to. And negligence is not criminal. And I think, and I'm all for, by the way, opening this further, looking into whatever they can find. And I am very confident I'd go to Vegas betting that they will not find anything, as they didn't with Benghazi. And quite frankly, you can't have the hypocrisy. You can't have it both ways. If you really want to rip open every, detail and reanalyze a million times at taxpayer expense these Clinton emails, then the same courtesy has to be done with regard to Russian collusion and obstruction of justice, and let this investigation play out.
They're telling me in my ear that I have time for this. We might have to just have a quick reaction. But today, the Attorney General making some other news in regards to marijuana laws, basically saying he's rescinding the guidance that says you don't have to go after them and enforce the laws against marijuana for those states that have legalized it. Here's Cory Gardner, the senator from Colorado, on the Senate floor just moments ago.
I would like to know from the Attorney General what has changed? What has changed President Trump's mind that the Cole memorandum would be reversed and rescinded? What has changed the president's mind? Why is Donald Trump thinking differently today about what he promised the people of Colorado in 2016? The reverse course today. What changed? I'd like to know that. I think the people of Colorado deserve to have that answer.
Colorado certainly, Guy, one of the first states to go ahead and legalize. It's like fully entrenched now, for better or worse. What do you think about what Cory Gardner was saying, which is he's demanding an answer to the question of what changed, what is different now?
Well, I understand why he's frustrated. Look, I'm not an advocate of marijuana use. It's not something I've ever done myself. But I also question, with all the challenges that we face in this country and all the challenges that the law enforcement community faces every single day, stopping terrorism, MS-13, really serious threats, I really strongly believe that taking government and federal resources to go after states that have made a decision on their own to decriminalize or legalize marijuana is just really the wrong approach to this on a number of levels.
Let me give Leslie the last word, and I guess I would just put this out there that it is true that the Congress hasn't passed a law that would say that we don't need to do this anymore. Basically, this was just guidance. And once again, the executive branch is saying to Congress, if you want this, then you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to pass a law yourself.
Very true. Guy, we start the new year actually agreeing on something. Look, with regard to not only priorities in this country, let's look at priorities with regard to drugs. We have opiates that come in from other countries such as Afghanistan, cocaine that comes in from South America through Central America and Mexico, and we have an opiate crisis here in this country that is reaching in many states epidemic proportions. We don't see this with marijuana usage. This is not a proper use of the DEA's funding or staffing. It doesn't help the American people, and quite frankly, it'll hurt a lot of small business owners in Washington, Colorado, and as of this week, here in California.
Not to mention, oh yeah, California. You're flying high now, California. There's a lot of revenue that the government, state governments are using too.
And Dana, it's about priorities and it's about discretion. And in this case, marijuana, I think it's the wrong move.
Well, hopefully we'll hear from them later and maybe get an answer to that question that Senator Gardner posed. Guy Benson and Leslie Marshall, thanks so much.
Thank you, Dana.
Fox News alert: a major snowstorm smacking the Northeast. Believe me. Sparking blizzard warnings from coastal Virginia to eastern New England. Airports and schools closed. The winds are expected to pick up tonight. And Boston is having big problems with flooding. High tide impacting the entrance to this railway station. And our own Brian Yennis is there. Brian, we send you to all the hot spots.
Hey, Dana. Yeah, I can confirm it is snowing. We've been seeing gusts of winds. We're here in downtown Boston by the waterfront. Behind me, emergency crews are here near the aquarium station here in downtown. Reports we can confirm that water has definitely seeped into the station here, the T station. It's Boston's subway system, down into the aquarium station. There are no injuries, according to fire officials here. We do know, however, that the water here is now the second highest on record, the second highest tide Boston has ever seen as of right now, according to the National Weather Service of Boston. Remember, we're talking about 4.7 feet. If you look over here, this is why it's so dangerous. This right here is actually water. That car right there is actually stuck in, it's in water right now. You can't tell because it's frozen. And if you look in the back over there, that's Boston Harbor this way. So if we were to walk over here, you'd see just chunks of ice. And this is what the concern is all throughout Boston right now, especially on the Cape and on the South Shore, because what's happening is you've got 40, 50, 60 mile-an-hour winds that are coming along the Cape and along the waterfront here. And now you've got heavy snow and precipitation, and you add all of that with the freezing temperatures, and you can have power outages. And the last thing you want in this freezing weather are power outages. And so they're telling people that if you do lose power and you do lose heat, you need to go to a warming shelter as soon as you can. Now, the peak of this storm is going to be really up until 4 or 5 p.m. today. More than a foot of snow here in Boston. And again, a second highest tide that this city has seen so far. Luckily, though, like I said, no injuries out of that station here in downtown.
It certainly looks like the perfect storm, especially with high tide. Are we safe to tell the children of Boston that they don't have to go to school tomorrow?
Yeah, that's a good point. I do not know. I cannot confirm. I know that Marty Walsh, the mayor here of Boston, is going to be having a press conference here at 3 o'clock. I'm sure we'll know about the schools tomorrow. Majority of schools have been closed today. Remember, though, this isn't just about the snow. We're talking about extreme Arctic blast after this storm, a deep freeze, minus 20 wind chill over the next 2 days. That is just dangerously cold. So, again, that's why power outages are such a big deal.
Indeed. I'm glad you're able to get that message out to the folks. Thanks so much, Brian.
Of course.
The White House press briefing is about to start any minute now on a very busy news day. We'll take you there when it starts. This is the White House is moving to stop publication of that new book disparaging members of the Trump family. Will the rift between the president and Steve Bannon hurt Mr. Trump with his core supporters.
I think him and the president had common interests with. But the notion that the president needs him for his base, I soundly reject that.
As promised, here's Sarah Sanders.
With that in mind, we have a message from a special guest that I'd like to share with you. With that, I'll ask you to tune into the screens, and then I'll continue from there.
Thank you for being with us today. The historic tax cut I signed into law just 2 weeks ago before Christmas is already delivering major economic gains. Hundreds of thousands of Americans are seeing larger paychecks, bigger bonuses, and higher pension contributions. And it's all because of the tax cuts and the tax reform. And I want to thank all of the companies that work so hard to do it. Workers at AT&T, Bank of America, Comcast, Southwest Airlines, American Airlines, and many other companies are receiving bonuses of $1,000 or more. Aflac and others are investing more in employees' 401ks. CVS announced it will hire 3,000 new workers. Boeing, another great company, is investing hundreds of millions of dollars in employee training and infrastructure. More than 60 companies have announced they are raising wages, including many that have voluntarily raised their minimum wage to $15 per hour. And I mean, they did that voluntarily, which many politicians said could only be achieved by government mandate. Investing in the American worker is the most important investment a business will ever make. I want to thank all of these companies for putting their tax savings to the best possible use by creating more jobs and higher wages for the American family. These great results are just the beginning. When the dreams of the American people are unleashed, there is nothing, absolutely nothing we can't achieve. We are going to make America great again, and it's happening a lot faster than anyone thought possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. As he said, this is only the beginning, and we are excited to see the economic growth and optimism continue to soar in 2018. Earlier today, the president hosted Republican senators to talk about responsible immigration reform. He reiterated our view that any action on DACA must come with action on the president's immigration reform principles, which were released last year. These include a physical border wall on the southern border, interior enforcement, which includes more ICE and Border Patrol agents, as well as a crackdown on sanctuary cities, and reforms to our legal immigration system, like ending chain migration and the visa lottery program in favor of a merit-based immigration system. Next week, the president is inviting a bipartisan group of senators to the White House to discuss the next steps on responsible immigration reform and to continue that discussion. And with that, I'll take your questions. Jeff.
Sarah, a follow-up on the Steve Bannon issue. Did White House staff, including Steve, have to sign non-disclosure agreements when they came to work at the White House?
There's an ethics agreement. Beyond that, I can't get into any additional details.
And does the president want to have Steve's support for anti-establishment political candidates going up into the midterm elections?
The president wants all Americans' support. He hopes that every American in this country wants to see us do bigger and better things. That's his focus. He's not trying to single out the support from any one individual, but he wants to bring everybody together to move this country forward. That's what he campaigned on, and that's what we've done over the last year, and that's what we're going to continue to do for the next 7 years. Yeah.
The White House has said there were false statements in this book. The president's lawyer has said there were libelous statements. Could you just give a few examples of things that have been said in this book that are false, that you would like to set the record straight on?
I'm not going to go through every single page of the book, but there are numerous examples of falsehoods that take place in the book. I'll give you one just because it's really easy. The fact that there was a claim that the president didn't know who John Boehner was is pretty ridiculous, considering the majority of you have seen photos, and frankly, several of you have even tweeted out that the president not only knows him, but has played golf with him, tweeted about him. I mean, that's pretty simple and pretty basic. Ages of employees, which would be super easy to fact check, are wrong. Again, there are numerous mistakes, but I'm not going to waste my time or the country's time going page by page talking about a book that's complete fantasy and just full of tabloid gossip, because it's sad, pathetic, and our administration and our focus is going to be on moving the country forward. John?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. I read the cease and desist letter that was sent by the president's lawyers to both Michael Wolff and Henry Holt, the publisher of his book, which seeks to stop the sale of his book. Did the president's lawyers share with the president the idea that this is a prior restraint and that prior restraints are generally unconstitutional?
I'm not sure about specific details of the conversation between the president and his personal attorneys, but I would refer you to them for questions regarding that matter. Jordan?
Does the president believe in the First Amendment? Does he believe in prior restraints such as the one that's contemplated here?
The president absolutely believes in the First Amendment, but as we've said before, the president also believes in making sure that information is accurate before pushing it out as fact when it certainly and clearly is not. Jordan?
What's the president's reaction to the growing number of suggestions, both in this book and in the media, that he's mentally unfit to serve as president?
The same way we have when it's been asked before that it's disgraceful and laughable. If he was unfit, he probably wouldn't be sitting there and wouldn't have defeated the most qualified group of candidates the Republican Party has ever seen. This is an incredibly strong and good leader. That's why we've had such successful 2017 and why we're going to continue to do great things as we move forward in this administration. John?
Thank you, Sarah. Two questions. First, the book repeatedly says that candidate Trump, his family, and the top officials of the campaign did not believe he would be elected. It was the farthest from their mind. You said yesterday you believed in this candidate and felt he would win. Can you name anyone else who said at the time, on the eve of the election, that they felt he would win, and did the president himself believe he would not win?
Look, as we've stated many times before, go back and look at some of the interviews, specifically Kellyanne Conway. I know she did several leading up to the days just before the election, saying directly that the president can win and would win. I know there were a number of other campaign officials that echoed those same sentiments. The president, the first lady, his family, they wouldn't have put themselves through that process if, one, they didn't believe they could win, and two, they didn't want to win. This was something they were very committed to and have been committed to since taking office, and will continue to do so over the next 7 years. Again, it is absolutely laughable to think that somebody like this president would run for office with the purpose of losing. If you guys know anything, you know that Donald Trump is a winner, and he's not going to do something for the purpose of not coming out on top and not coming out as a winner. It's just, I mean, that's one of the most ridiculous things, I think, the claims in the book.
My other question is, tomorrow, can we expect a major personnel change? And I particularly ask, is Gary Cohn going to stay where he is?
I have no reason to know of any personnel change whatsoever. Gary has stated he's committed to being here. We just have come off of a very successful win on the tax cut and reform package, which Gary was one of the key leaders of that effort, and we're moving full force ahead into 2018 to make sure we get a lot accomplished. Francesca.
Thank you, Sarah. I wanted to follow up on something you said yesterday. The last time that the president spoke to Steve Bannon was early December, at least to your knowledge, you said. So that's one thing. But secondly, the president said today, I don't talk to Steve Bannon. I don't talk to him. So how much were they in contact from the time that he left the White House to that early December call that you mentioned? And also, how close were they when they were in the White House? One of the claims that was made in the book was that he frequently dined with Mr. Bannon unless he was already in bed.
The book also says that he had been sidelined by April, which I think goes further to indicate that he had very little credibility to give much information, particularly after that point, which most of the book is based after that time frame. Again, this book is mistake after mistake after mistake.
By April, Sarah, were they not close by the time that he left?
I'm not aware that they were ever particularly close. I would certainly say that they've spoken a few times since he left the White House, but it's not like there were regularly scheduled calls or and certainly no meetings between the two of them. Fred?
Thanks, Sarah. This regarding the election commission and the president's tweets that follow that. Does the president, on voter ID, does the president favor a national voter ID?
Look, we're still going to continue to review the best way forward. Just because the Election Commission is no longer in existence, we are going to send the preliminary findings from the Commission to the Department of Homeland Security and make determinations on the best way forward from that point.
And on that, why the DHS instead of DOJ, which would seem to be more of an investigative body?
That was the agency that was best determined by the administration, and we're moving forward and letting them take over the process. Trey?
Thanks, Sarah. Two questions for you. First, does President Trump see marijuana as a state's issue or a federal issue?
The president believes in enforcing federal law. That would be his top priority, and that is regardless of what the topic is, whether it's marijuana or whether it's immigration. The president strongly believes that we should enforce federal law. The move that the Department of Justice has made, which my guess is what you're referencing, simply gives prosecutors the tools to take on large-scale distributors and enforce federal law. The president's position hasn't changed, but he does strongly believe that we have to enforce federal law.
And without getting ahead of the president, the meeting this afternoon with the RNC chairwoman, do you imagine that they will be discussing a potential run by Mitt Romney in Utah? Is this something that the president would like to discuss with Mitt Romney's niece?
Like you said, I'm not going to get ahead of a meeting that hasn't taken place and try to guess what may be discussed. And, you know, maybe we can follow up with that question at a later time. Ashley.
Sarah, it's an incredibly high bar for a public figure to win a libel case, a public figure, especially like the president. So I was hoping you could explain why the president thinks it's an appropriate use of attention and resources to marshal both his West Wing and his legal team against the book's author, the book's publisher, and a former staffer.
In terms of a legal argument, I would refer you to the president's attorneys, but in terms of the merits, I think it's pretty clear. I don't think we have been tiptoeing around our feelings on this. It's completely tabloid gossip full of false and fraudulent claims, and I would refer you to the president's attorneys on what that looks like in the court of law. Noah. Or Brian, sorry. Brian's slow today.
Thank you, Sarah. Will the president go to court to stop the publication of this book?
Again, that's something that I would refer you to the president's attorneys, but our position is very clear that we think it is full of false and fake information.
The book's going to be published on Tuesday. I mean, how far is the president willing to go to prevent this book from being published?
He certainly believes that it shouldn't be, but in terms of the legal process, I would have to refer you to his legal team on that front. Margaret.
Sarah, I know we're talking a lot about Steve Bannon, but he's not the only person quoted in this book. Katie Walsh, who worked for this White House, was quoted on the record extensively.
Who I believe has also put out a statement denying that those quotes are attributed to her.
Is there any kind of action being taken by the White House against any of these individuals? Is there outreach to these individuals who are quoted to verify whether, in fact, they made these statements or not? You know, there are these reports that there are going to be perhaps implications for her potentially being pushed out of groups that work to help support the president from the outside.
I'm not aware of any specific action being taken. I do know that she has come out and said that the quotes were not attributed to her, as have many other people that this has been, that they've been quoted in this book.
Take them at their word and there won't be implications?
Well, I absolutely, particularly people like Secretary Mnuchin, who has pushed back on this, and several others. I think you have to look also at this author's track record in which he's had a real problem with this in the past. And I think that that is something that has certainly laid a foundation for us to make the assumption that he is definitely, this is a practice that he is used to doing.
And no further legal action against any of those individuals?
Not that I'm aware of at this time. Kevin.
Sarah, thanks. Just a couple. I just want to ask you, broadly speaking, what's your level of exhaustion when you have to have this issue out there when there are other policy issues you're trying to get to and trying to communicate to the American people? How do you balance that? And I guess the obvious would be, did you speak to the president specifically about what has been said, or at least has been released about this book?
I have spoken to the president about some of the specifics that have come up. In terms of the level of exhaustion, I'm less concerned with my exhaustion as I am with the people of this country who frankly probably could care less about a book full of lies and would really like to hear more about the booming economy, the crushing of ISIS, all of the great things that are happening in this country, or all of the big problems that we're focused on tackling. I don't think they really care about some trash that an author that no one had ever heard of until today or a fired employee wants to peddle. This is the focus of this administration, is moving our country forward, and hopefully everybody in this room will join us in that effort and focus on some of the policy components instead of some of the ridiculous lies that we have to spend all of our time in here focused on.
If I can follow on immigration very quickly, is it your impression that something will be done vis-a-vis the wall, and there'll be a grand announcement of some sort that the president would like to make on that?
Again, we'd like to make sure that we have responsible immigration reform, as I said at the front. We'd like to have a deal where we have DACA as well as those priorities and principles that we laid out last year met, and that's the reason that the president is inviting members from the Democrat Party to come over next week so that we can have that discussion and see if we can move the ball forward in that process. Kristen.
Sarah, thank you. As a candidate, President Trump threatened some 20 lawsuits and followed through with 2 of them. So why should Steve Bannon and Michael Wolff be concerned?
I think that regardless of whether or not there's a lawsuit, they should be concerned about peddling fake stories. They should be concerned about putting out information that's not true. They should be concerned about the fact that we're spending all of our time here focused on talking about this instead of things that people in this country care about. I think that's a really sad process, and I think that that should be everyone's concern.
Is the president committed to following through with these lawsuits?
I think that's a question you'd have to talk to his attorneys about, and whether or not that moves forward and what that looks like.
Don't you just run the risk of increasing book sales, though, Sarah, drawing more attention to this?
I think you guys are the ones that are drawing the attention. Every question basically that I've been asked has to do with that. It's not like I came out here and read excerpts from the book, so I don't think that I can be responsible for the questions that you asked. In fact, if I tried to do that, I'm sure I would certainly be attacked for trying to, because I did that once and it didn't go over very well. Mike, go ahead.
Is the cell phone ban a response to the revelations in this book?
Absolutely not. That's a ridiculous characterization. This is about the security and the integrity of the technology systems here at the White House. This is something that has been in process and in the works for over 6 months, and we were making sure that all of the information and the ability for the government phones to increase their ability for other application so that we can comply with Presidential Records Act. That was a big piece of making sure that this was done. Now that that process is completed, we can move forward, and that'll start next week. Mike.
Can you, how would you describe the president's relationship with the Mercer family?
I'm sorry?
The president's relationship with the Mercer family, how would you describe that?
I believe it's good. I haven't heard otherwise, but I'm not aware of anything specific.
You were eager to call on ESPN to fire one of its sportscasters for criticizing President Trump.
It wasn't just criticizing, it was a little bit different than that.
Well, should Breitbart part ways with Steve Bannon after these comments in these books?
I certainly think that it's something they should look at and consider. Brian?
Thanks. I'd like to drill down on something that Peter asked yesterday, and I profess my ignorance in this, but next week when he goes for his
You said it, not
smile,
me. Yeah.
So
I mean, if you want to call yourself ignorant, I'm not going to argue.
He goes for so enlighten me, make me smart. So next week when he goes to his physical, are there mental acuity tests that go along with that, or is it purely physical in nature?
We'll discuss, as I said, when I announced that he was going to be doing the physical. We'll have a readout of that after that is completed, and we'll let you know at that time.
The second question I have for you is, yesterday you said Steve Bannon was entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts. This administration has said on many occasions that they are entitled to alternative facts. So how is that different with Steve Bannon?
This administration has not said on numerous occasions that there are alternative facts. I know that there was one reference in which they were saying there's basically 2 sides to the story. I think that's very different than completely false information and an opinion. Dave.
Sarah, thanks. The president said today that Steve Bannon changed his tune about him last night. Does the president feel that the cease and desist letter had the desired effect on Steve Bannon?
I'm not sure what aspect made him change his tune, but I think that there was certainly a difference in some of the language that he used for this book versus the language that he used last night.
A question on oil drilling, please. Rick Scott, the governor of Florida, is expressing concerns about the administration's new offshore oil drilling plan, which would allow, obviously, drilling on most coastal waters. Can the president afford to cross this important political ally, and what do you plan to say to Governor Scott about the whole plan?
Our goal certainly isn't to cross Governor Scott. We have a great relationship with him. We're going to continue working with him on a number of issues. Just because we may differ on issues from time to time doesn't mean that we can't still have an incredibly strong and good relationship. We'll continue those conversations with him and hopefully all come to an agreement. I'll take one last question. Jim?
You were calling the Michael Wolff book a book full of lies. Didn't this White House give Michael Wolff all the access that he wanted?
Absolutely not. In fact, there are probably more than 30 requests for access to information from Michael Wolff that were repeatedly denied, including within that at least 24 requests of him asking to have an interview with the president, which he never did. He never discussed this book with the president. And to me, that would be the most important voice that you could have if you were looking to write a book about an individual, would be to have some time with him. He never did. He was repeatedly denied that, I think because we saw him for what he was, and there was no reason for us to waste the president of the United States' time. And frankly, since we were unable, I'll let you have one follow-up.
I appreciate that. Should the letter from the president's lawyers aimed at Steve Bannon and aimed at the publisher be interpreted as a threat from the United States government, from this administration, to not publish this book?
It's not from the United States government. It's from the president's personal attorney, and I think it is very clear what its purpose is. And there's nothing to add beyond that. If you have specifics on that, I would refer you to the president's attorneys. Thanks so much, guys.
Will the president finally acknowledge that millions of people did not vote illegally?
All right, that is Sarah Sanders leaving the briefing room. She's basically the press secretary that has to get up there and answer lots of questions about a decision she did not make, which was to have Michael Wolff, the author, come into the White House and interview a lot of officials, and she's going to just have to get through this. It will end, but for now, this is the story of the day. Joining me now is attorney James Trusty, a former Justice Department official who served under the Obama administration and Bush administration. Leslie Marshall rejoins us, and she's a syndicated radio host and Fox News contributor, in case you forgot, and Josh Kroshar is political editor for National Journal. While I have you, James, let me start with you. One of the questions here was about these potential lawsuits and filings against both Steve Bannon for a cease and desist and against the publisher, asking them not to publish the book. Do they have legal standing to win these types of cases?
Well, they have an opportunity to file, but it's got about a snowball's chance in hell of succeeding. You've got a public figure talking about public matters. It requires a level of malice on behalf of Bannon and the publishers that is just going to be almost impossible to establish. So there may be some good bluff power to a cease and desist letter, but in terms of ultimately litigating it, my sense is it wouldn't go very far.
And do you think that these are suits that would actually be filed, or is it more of a chance to at least push back on the PR front?
I think they could. I think they could file them. I think there's a little more mileage now out of threatening than actually filing it. I don't think it helps anybody but the book sales to go forward with an actual case.
Earlier, Leslie, on the show before Sarah Sanders briefed, we talked about the possibility of, full bore countering a book or just trying to starve it of attention. The president had a very strong statement against Steve Bannon yesterday. I think she could have let that stand and refused to answer any more questions about it. That's not the decision that they've made. How do you think she did today in pushing back?
You know, Dana, it's funny, I'm talking to you about this and her, because even though, you served for a Republican president, I always felt that you handled yourself very well in that role. I wouldn't say the same about this current press secretary. Her style is just not my style. I don't find it as palatable. And I think what you suggested would have been the right thing for her and for this administration to do. I think it helps the book sales, and I don't think it helps the administration.
I could argue
and
it either
I certainly
way.
Don't think it's a good start for 2018.
Well, I could argue it either way, and I do actually feel for her because, Josh, this was not a decision that she made, right? So she inherited a bad decision by, I guess, Steve Bannon to invite Michael Wolff into the White House, to give him lots of access, and now she's the one that has to back clean up. Now, that's her job, and I think she does it well. But what do you think about what she was saying, that the American people really don't care about any of this? I kind of agree with that, right? This is a story that lasts for a few days, and then it will go away. But do you think it'll have any lasting impact?
Well, look, I think the biggest political news that she made in the briefing was that she said that Breitbart should consider firing Steve Bannon. And that really divides the Republican Party, that it divides the Trump base. You see a lot of comments on the Breitbart comment board last night that sided with Donald Trump over Steve Bannon. And as much as Steve Bannon likes to fashion himself as sort of the keeper of the Trump base, it's really all about the president. And Bannon is declaring war on President Trump. And now you have Trump's press secretary saying that Breitbart should at least consider firing Steve Bannon. That's shocking coming from the White House podium. And it could foreshadow a split in the Republican Party base going forward.
Yesterday, I saw somebody close to Bannon quoted as saying that he's unshaken. And then we played earlier his comments last night on his radio, saying that the president is radio show that he has on Sirius, saying the president's a good man and he didn't disparage him in any way. But let me ask you, Josh, from your political point of view, do you think that Bannon has done something that he thought he would never see, which is reuniting the Republican Party and behind Donald Trump and against the populist movement that Steve Bannon wanted to push?
It was fascinating to see in the wake of all this controversy that Mitch McConnell's operation put out a tweet showing the majority leader smiling, because the biggest fear from Republicans in Washington, establishment Republicans, was that Steve Bannon would boost these not ready for prime time primary challengers to some very conservative senators and really hurt the Republicans' ability to hold their Senate majority in 2018. And they were worried and trying to strategize about how they could diminish Steve Bannon's influence heading into the midterm elections. Steve Bannon basically made their job really easy. He self-immolated by attacking Trump so viciously. And now it looks like a lot of candidates that were looking to get Steve Bannon's support are now trying to distance themselves from the former Trump advisor. So this is about as good as it gets for Mitch McConnell, and that's why a lot of his advisors were publicly spiking the football.
A quick, very last question to you, James. Regarding Paul Manafort's lawsuit against Bob Mueller for, I guess, going beyond the scope of the investigation, do you think that one will have any standing?
I don't think it has much of a chance. It probably has about as much of a chance as Matt Lauer co-hosting your show. But
yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
Right, but there's a different vehicle for it, which would be a criminal motion to dismiss. That's a more logical avenue to try to attack the scope of the independent counsel investigation. That may still come. I just don't know what the strategy would be to go with a civil motion that's going to have all sorts of procedural burdens and maybe some substantive ones too.
All right, James Tressy, Leslie Marshall, and Josh Kroshar, thank you so much for being with us after that briefing. We'll talk to Karl Rove next about all this and get his 2018 predictions as well.
Not having a